Hello, and welcome to Faith in the Fallout. This is our first podcast, so hopefully everything is working and you can hear us and all that stuff. We are Kyle and Laura Drake. We've been married since 2011, and we have 2 kids, and we live in Southern Michigan. We attended Radiant Church Jackson in Jackson, Michigan for about 10 years, and we were heavily involved in the church there. Radiant Jackson is a part of the Radiant Network, which has over 50 churches across the U.S. and one in Mexico.
Today we're going to be sharing our story of our exit from Radiant Church Jackson. It's with a heavy heart that we are doing this podcast. Not doing it in joy or in happiness, not seeking revenge, retribution against certain people. We're not seeking to damage or destroy the church. We are attempting to do this in love and humility. And we are doing this podcast out of a sense of duty. 1 Timothy 5:17 through 23. The elders who direct the affairs of the church well are worthy of double honor, especially those whose work is preaching and teaching. For Scripture says, do not muzzle an ox while it is treading out the grain, and the worker deserves his wages. Do not entertain an accusation against an elder unless it is brought by 2 or 3 witnesses. But those elders who are sinning you are to reprove before everyone, so that the others may take warning. I charge you in the sight of God and Christ Jesus and the elect angels to keep these instructions without partiality and to do nothing out of favoritism. So we have brought accusations of unrepentant sin against the elders of Radiant Church Jackson, with more than 2 or 3 witnesses. We have presented allegations to the elders and have called for repentance from those we are accusing. No repentance has been made. From our perspective, it appears these accusations have been ignored. And since the elders would not do what we believe is their duty, we believe it is our duty to follow the command of 1 Timothy 5:20. But those elders that keep on sinning, you are to reprove before everyone, so that others may take warning.
With that in mind, we're embarking to reprove these elders before everyone so that others can be warned. We believe the elders of Radiant Jackson are using their spiritual authority to hurt people. The elders have chosen to protect their fellow elders rather than protecting the people they are supposed to be shepherding. In short, the elders are not doing the job they are called to do. We are one of many who are stepping into a breach created by the elders' failure in an attempt to protect people. We will attempt to protect the past victims, the current victims, and any future victims of the elders of Radiant Church Jackson. The elders are refusing to shine a light on sin within their own ranks, so we are stepping in to shine a light on the sin so everyone can see it.
And why we're telling our story is that our eyes were open to the spiritual abuse that we experience because of hearing stories of others. Specifically, we heard stories of 6 women who came out of IHOP KC. They were on a podcast called Remnant Radio. And so I want to publicly thank Sherry Hall, Elizabeth Herder, Jen Roberts, Joanna May, Rachel Steele, and Julie Meyer. Thank you for your courage in sharing your story. Because of your boldness and because of your story, God opened our eyes to what we were experiencing.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your stories. That was really impactful to me, and it sort of started me on this realizing that this is true and it's really happening to us as well. So thank you, and also thank you, Remnant Radio, for making space for that kind of these kinds of issues on your podcast.
And as we've talked with many victims by this point and heard many other stories on different podcasts, YouTube, things of that nature, almost every person talks about how they heard somebody else's story. And just like we did, that opened our eyes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, we're going to share our story to expose the sin of the leadership of Radiant, but also to encourage other victims of spiritual abuse and potentially open the eyes of others who don't realize they're being abused.
Yeah. And again, we're not doing this just because we want to do a podcast. Like, we don't want to do a podcast. We're not doing this just to dig at the elders or the pastors of Radiant Church Jackson, but we believe the Bible is true and there's a high calling on elders, and we believe that they're shirking their duties here.
Yeah, so before we begin, we're going to jump into a few definitions so that we define the terms we're going to be talking about this. First, we're going to define spiritual abuse. We're going to use a definition by Michael J. Kruger, who wrote the book Bully Pulpit. Highly recommend, by the way. Talk about that later. Spiritual abuse is when a spiritual leader, such as a pastor, elder, or head of a Christian organization, wields his position of spiritual authority in such a way that he manipulates, domineers, bullies, and intimidates those under him as a means of accomplishing what he takes to be biblical and/or spiritual goals.
Yeah, so this part might not be very exciting, but defining terms is important to us. So when we say Radiant from here on out, we are referring to Radiant Church Jackson in Jackson, Michigan. But as we said at the top of the episode, there are many Radiant churches, a part of the Radiant Network. And there are churches that have a Radiant name but are not a part of the Radiant Network. However, we believe that this is an issue that is network-wide and it's systemic inside the whole Radiant Network. So that being said, when we say Radiant, we are usually speaking from our own experience. So we mean Radiant Jackson. If we are talking about a different Radiant Network church, we will specify the location or name of that Radiant Network church.
And also, as part of our story, it's obviously intertangled with a bunch of other people's stories. So those that have given us permission to share, we may share parts of their stories. Some people have given us permission to use their names. Some people have not. Some people don't want their stories out at all. So we are going to try. We have tried. We'll continue to try to protect the safety and the agency of those who have entrusted us with their stories. And so if we're being vague about something, it's likely intentional to protect the identity of whoever we're talking about. Did I cover that well?
Yeah, I think it makes sense. One of the things that when we started bringing our concerns to our friends was they didn't like how we were not naming people's names. And to me, it felt really strange that we were calling them sources, but because we're not journalists here, like we're not trained in journalism, but in the terms of them being our sources, they are really victims. So we're going to use the terms pretty much sources. Just think of it as victims because they truly are victims here. We are also victims, but we want to maintain the just the request of these people to not be identified. Yeah.
All right. So to start our story, I think we need to start with some confession and repentance on our end. As we have walked this road, we have come to realize that we were part of the problem. I personally lied on multiple occasions to protect the leadership of the church. I was asked to lie on other times where I spread stories about people that I now know were false. Sometimes I knew they were false. Sometimes I didn't find out till later. But I was definitely part of the problem at the church. In addition, as a whole, we treated people as expendable, I think would be a good way to say that.
I don't think we saw it that way at the time, but now we see it as people are expendable for the sake of the church vision.
Yeah, and the biggest point I think is as people left, as people who were our friends just ghosted and disappeared, we never reached out to them. We never went and asked them for their side of the story. We never asked them what happened. We never talked to them again, or if we did see them, we just kept it strictly business and never talked about what happened at Radiant. And so I want to personally apologize to all of you. We have reached out to a number of people since then, but I am sure there are those out there who left that we haven't reached out to. And so we want to ask you, from all of you, we want to ask your forgiveness. We repent and we are sorry.
Yeah, we're sorry for the way we treated you and that our inaction is still making a choice. Also, I wanted to apologize for the people that came to Radiant because we vouched for it, because we did believe, and there here's the thing. God is working everywhere. He works in the good and the bad. He works in the messy. So it took us a while, but we realized that we were a part of the system that put the church, and I don't mean the global church, I mean Radiant Church, on a pedestal.
The organization.
The
Radiant Church.
organization ahead of the individual people. And I don't think Jesus did that. Did Jesus do that? No, he didn't do that. So I want to apologize. We were small group leaders. We were involved in I was involved in women's ministry, and I taught in Sunday school. And I'm just, to the people who I encouraged to stick around, I'm sorry. To the people who I minimized your pain, now I see that it was protecting the leadership, which I shouldn't have been doing. You are individuals, you are people that Jesus loves. And honestly, so are the pastors and elders of Radiant. Like, we recognize that. But the system, the organization is broken.
Yeah, and for those who did bring us their concerns throughout our 10 years at Radiant, and we, again, vouched for the leadership, or we minimized your concerns, or we explained them away, or we found, any of those things, because it happened a lot. And so I ask your forgiveness for those that I tried to, again, explain away your issues and your red flags that you were seeing.
Yeah.
Anything else?
I think
There's a lot. I want you to hear her. I don't think there is ever enough apologizing that we can do. We were a part of this system, and we realize we don't realize. I think we have a small window into how many people have been hurt by this system. And so the part that we played in that, we are deeply, deeply sorry. And those of you who we have hurt or have been hurt due to our actions or inactions, we ask your forgiveness.
Yeah, so that is heavy, but that's that we felt like was really necessary to talk about, and put some ownership on us, because we realized that we were a part of the problem there.
Yeah, so I think move on to our
Yeah,
story.
let's get into it.
So I guess our story of our exit kind of starts in November, December of 2023. I became aware of multiple staff members who were afraid to go to Mike, as in pastor.
The lead
Sorry,
pastor.
yeah. If
The
we don't
lead
define people, I apologize. If those of you who are not within the Radiant bubble don't know who we're talking about. Lead pastor Mike Bopenhagen. I found staff members were hesitant to go to him with concerns, and that's a huge red flag for me. Professionally, I am an auditor, and so if people in an organization are afraid to talk to the leadership of the organization, that's like a massive red flag. So I set up a meeting with Mike in December of 2023 to bring that to his attention, and also to talk through. I was concerned that all of the day-to-day operations of the church, all the items, all the questions seemed to flow to him, and he would make the decisions on everything. And so of a church that's 10 years old with 1,000 people, it seemed like it needed to be more delegated. And so those were the concerns that I was taking to him. In this meeting, I was able to share everything I wanted to share. And then afterwards, Laura asked me, she's like, how'd the meeting go? I was like, oh, I think it went well. I shared everything I wanted to share, but something just didn't feel right.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember you came back and you just had this look like something was bothering you and you couldn't figure out what it was.
Yeah, and within that meeting, too, Mike told a story of a place, which I'll refer to as Place Z. I guess from here, you'll see. We also are putting a bunch of documents on our website, and so we're going to refer to people that are in these. They're referred to as Place Z in the document. But Mike referred to a place called Place Z, which was a now former network church where he was brought in to, as he put it, took over the church and forced the senior pastor out. And because of, he didn't really have a conclusion, but it seemed to me like he was like, oh, that's why we don't have an elder-led church and we have a senior pastor-led church. And I just thought that was weird for the context. But anyway, we'll get to that later. Post that meeting, I had my radar up, for lack of a better term. I was just paying attention and noticing things, and all these red flags that we'd seen for years and explained away for years started to add up in my head. It was before this, but I think it'd been bothering us subconsciously for a while. Before this, I'd stopped going to staff meetings as part of my.
You were contracted.
Yes, my firm was contracted to do the accounting for the church for almost the entire time we'd been there. And so I'd gone to staff meetings before, and I had stopped doing that. The church was planning another campus, which was twice the distance from our house, and yet we were going to that campus. I think subconsciously I was running away. I was uncomfortable with what I was seeing, and yeah, didn't have words for it. Didn't know anything at that point, but yeah, what am I trying to say?
Of course, you picked the point where I'm muting my mic to take a drink of water.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak for myself. I was serving in children's ministry, and I was so burned out. And I'd been in counseling for a while, and we were talking about some of these things, like just being a mom of little kids and also serving in children's ministry and having to serve every Sunday, the same service every Sunday. I was so burned out. And I think I just started to feel like something wasn't right, but I couldn't figure out what it was. And I thought, oh, if I just do less, I'll feel better. But that wasn't really the solution.
Yeah. And so from that point, we started to, again, had our radar up. We were watching things. And then the stories from IHOP KC started dropping out. If you're not familiar with that, Mike Bickle, now that the report has come out, I guess it's not allegations, he sexually abused many, many women over decades.
And this is International House of Prayer, Kansas City, is what IHOP KC stands for.
So anyway, we started listening to those, especially we heard the ones that we had mentioned before on Remnant Radio. And as these women were talking, like I remember it vividly. I was downstairs doing laundry, listening with my headphones in, and they asked them, what were the red flags that you ignored that looking back you wish you would have paid attention to? And as these women listed them off, it was like a checklist of my own red flags that I had ignored. And just internally, I was like, oh no, we have a problem.
We're going to put a link to that. We're going to figure out how to do notes or podcast notes. We're going to figure that out. And we're going to...
Maybe. Somebody else might figure it out and help us.
We're also going to have a website, so we'll link that too. But we're going to have links to these things, so that we definitely think you should go listen to that episode. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Oh, no, that's yeah. And so from then, I started getting my hands on everything I could on spiritual abuse. Listening to stories of victims from other places, you name it. There's just throw a rock at a story right now in Christian world, and there's abuse stories out there. But then also getting my hands on books like Bully Pulpit by, I think it's like Michael J. Kruger, Church Called Tove by Scott McKnight, Something's Not Right by Wade Mullen. Began reading the stuff put out by Julie Roys and the Roys Report, and just really started to learn about this. And it was, as we're reading the books, it was as if Radiant was following the playbook of the abusers in these books.
Yeah, and I think for me, there was a certain level of denial that I went through for a while, and then I listened to this podcast of the ladies from IHOP KC, and I mean, at some point, the amount of evidence, it's just really hard to ignore and be in denial anymore. So yeah, let's see. Then we started having some meetings with some people who had left Radiant Jackson. People who because that was one of the things, I don't know if it was in a book or in the podcast.
It was in both.
Okay, about people who just sort of disappear and you don't really know. And of course, that happens in churches. People move, it's not meshing with them. But I think if you think about it, you know when something isn't right. I think that's the Holy Spirit being like, hey, something's up. So we went to these friends and just, I think he reached out to most of them with a text message of like, hey, we're leaving Radiant Jackson. Am I summarizing how
It
your
was even
text went
before
well?
we had decided to leave that I started these meetings. But yeah,
Yeah,
just
and I
this,
think your intent was to go in and apologize for not talking to them,
yeah, and
to just letting our good, close friends sort of disappear, and we never asked them why they left. I know that was that was your heart of apologizing to them and then giving space for them to speak about it if they wanted to.
yeah, and at this point, I remember the the morning before my first meeting, I was having a call with my friend Mark, who I meet with every week, and I told him like I know what I'm going to find, and that terrifies me. And sure enough, I had lunch with the first person, um, and yeah, like Laura said, I started off by apologizing, just like we did with this podcast. Of I'm sorry I let you go. Like these were close friends of ours, and I'm like I am so sorry I let you go. I am so sorry I never asked. And just that asked if you'd be willing, could you tell me what happened? Um, and from there, just heard stories. And again, this is just first person, but then all the other people we reach out to, it was story after story of just, I don't even know, just,
I think I was overwhelmed with that. Pretty much everybody we talked to had their own thing that were like, oh, but we knew about spiritual abuse at this point. Like we knew what it was and what it was defined as. So everybody that you talked to or I talked to, we were like, oh, that's not right. But we're just accepting it as okay because why? Why are we accepting this as okay behavior? Especially for a church, especially for pastors and people of Jesus to be treating each other this way.
yeah. And the theme as we had these conversations was that people would bring concerns to the leadership. And when that happened, they would get crushed. Whether it was booting them from the church, taking away community groups, taking away positions where they were serving. Um, it was just time and time and time again, people would bring concerns and the leadership would respond harshly. And just, I mean, often straight up gaslighting of telling them they're the problem, saying, oh, you have an orphan heart, was a common theme that people were told when they brought concerns.
Yeah, it's definitely a problem if people can't ask a question of leadership. If you ask a question and you just get completely like cut off, that's not okay.
Yeah.
Again, especially in the kingdom of God.
Yeah. And at that point, too, another pattern that emerged is that people felt they couldn't say no to the leaders. And that's, yeah, for us, not okay. But even so, like at this point, this is getting in. So this has been like meeting in December,
Mhm.
podcast in March, and we're into like late July at this point, early August.
I mean, we are recording this in March 2025. Kyle's first meeting was in December 2023.
Yeah.
So basically all of 2024, the spring of 2024 was us like meeting with people, gathering information, trying to figure out, is this true? Is this really real?
Or are we just crazy?
Yeah, like I mean, it's not right, but is this how all churches operate? The answer is no. Um,
More than should, let's just say that.
yeah. And then so it was in the summer when we finally decided we were done and we couldn't put up with it anymore. We decided to leave the church, and I remember vividly that we were discussing the last time of attending on a Sunday service. Do you remember this?
Well,
I was like, I am not going. I cannot. We had just heard the story of a couple and it was so heartbreaking that I was like, I can't go in there. I'm going to be sick.
yeah, I wanted to stay and, for lack of a better term, fight from the inside until we got kicked out.
And a big thing for me was thinking about our kids. We have 2 kids and the children's ministry workers at Radiant Church Jackson have been wonderful. We have no complaints with them. Everything's been great with them. So this isn't about them. But I had a huge problem with having our kids in a place where they couldn't say no to leadership and they couldn't say no to people in authority, because we had seen that from the stories we'd heard time and time again, that they couldn't say no. And here we are raising 2 young kids. And it's been over a year and I'm still like emotional about it, because the things we have seen in the world, in organizations and in churches, where women and people in general just can't say no to people in authority, it's a big problem. And I just refuse to let our kids be in an environment like that. Whether it had not happened to them before, like none of this had happened, everything was fine. But why would I let them stay in a place where they had to always say yes to somebody in spiritual authority over them? I was not okay with that.
Yeah, and so once Laura said that, I was like, okay, yep, we're done. That was, just straight wisdom from God, I think. And so Laura and the kids never went back again. I went back that next Sunday because I was scheduled to serve on the prayer team. And so I did that, and that was our last time there. That was the end of July. I set up a meeting then with Pastor Mike, the senior pastor, and then Pastor John Costin, the executive pastor. Just sent them an email asking to set up a meeting. They set it up 2 weeks out. They asked what it was about, and I told them I had some concerns I would like to talk about. And so in the meantime, I wrote a letter. I don't know how many pages it was. It was long.
It was long.
7, 8 pages. I don't know. If you want to check, go on the website. It's up there.
It's going to be there.
So I sent that letter to them on August 14th, 2024, about 24 hours before my meeting with them. Again, my meeting was supposed to be Pastor Mike and Pastor John and me. I get to the church for that meeting, and instead of Mike and John, I am met by John, Pastor Jeff Allen, who is an associate pastor and board member of Radiant Jackson. And then I was also met by Pastor Jerry Tice, who is the lead pastor of Radiant Church Ludington, also a board member and overseer of Radiant Church Jackson. If you're not familiar with those words, most people aren't, even within Radiant Jackson. Quick 30,000-foot view of the setup. You have elders at Radiant Church Jackson who, quote unquote, govern the affairs of the church. That is led by Mike Popenhagen, senior pastor, John Costin, executive pastor, Jeff Allen, associate pastor, all on staff. You also have Pastor Jeremy Brown, senior pastor of Radiant Ann Arbor. You have Jerry Tice, senior pastor of Radiant Ludington. And then you have Tim Pryor, who is the only non-staff or non-network pastor on the board. And then you have, outside of that, you have overseers, which is supposed to be where people can go if there are problems. The overseers are Lee Cummings, head of the Radiant Network and senior pastor of Radiant Church Richland, and then Jeremy Brown and Jerry Tice as well.
And question, I know the answer to this, but how did you know who those people were?
I know them because I have worked with Jerry and Jeremy professionally.
So does anybody else in the church know this?
No, I honestly didn't even know who all was on the board. You'll see that again in the August 14th letter. I raised this. Like, I'm heavily involved with the business side, and I don't even know who's on the board or who the overseers are. So
we were talking about the meeting, and I want to add this sort of funny thing, maybe in defense of them, that John Costin had been texting you, but he was using the office fax number.
Yes, he tried to tell me that Mike was not going to be there, but these other 2 guys were. And I was just ambushed because he was texting the wrong number.
But in his defense, right? Like, he was texting the fax number. Yeah. And we believe that.
Yeah.
So
when I walked into the meeting, saw that. And they said Mike was not there because he was, quote, emotionally compromised. And they wanted me to, quote, be able to speak freely. which, yeah, okay. I wanted a meeting with Mike to bring issues to Mike, and instead I got the board, or at least the other half of the board. But anyway, during that meeting, they had all seen my letter prior to that. I was also told that they sent the letter to the entire staff and all of the board members and overseers. I haven't talked with many of those people, I don't think, since then, so I have no idea.
But hey, it's on our website, staff members, if you haven't seen it.
Yeah, you can go read all these things up there. Anyway, in this meeting, I was able to say everything I wanted to say. And I don't think I said a single thing that I regret. I really felt I was being led by the Lord throughout the entire meeting. During this meeting, Jerry Tice, in my opinion, was brought there to intimidate me and to bully me. He was said time and time again, like, oh, you can never go public. You can't share this with anyone outside of this room. If you talk to other people, you are being a gossip. If you're doing this, you're being divisive. If you share outside of the room, you're going to destroy all of this. Honestly, textbook. Read any of these books that I've mentioned already. Read any book on abuse, and it's like textbook. This is what abusers do to silence people. They try to isolate people. They try to get you away from your community to protect themselves. And that's exactly what Jerry was there to do. Pastor Jeff, in my opinion, was there to get me to name names. Because again, I came in the letter with sources. You can read the letter yourself. I have sources, I have sources, I have sources. He said so many times, who do we even know who to talk to? How can we, there's so many people who left the church. We don't even know where to begin. And I just constantly was like, guys, just go back through who was high up in the church, as in who was in leadership positions within the volunteer base who just disappeared. Go talk to them. There's a place to start. Or anyone. Just reach out to anyone who's left the church and ask what happened.
The church isn't that big, so people who have left. You just decide to ignore that they've left.
Even Jerry said, he's like, so many people left the church, his church in Ludington. He's like, only one person has ever reached out to us to tell us why. And I said, Jerry, is that not and Jeff said the same thing. He said the same, well, yeah, nobody reaches out. And I'm like, do you not see the problem? Is that not a cultural problem that everyone would rather just ghost than to come to you before they leave? That they would rather just disappear than to come to you with their concerns. Come to find out, lots of people did come with their concerns, and that was not mentioned. And so it baffled me that they just had to me, it seemed they had no clue, or they were just covering it up, because I mentioned stuff about what was happening at IHOP KC, because they're like, Jerry said, never go public. And I said, well, what about at IHOP KC? If Jane Doe number 1 doesn't come forward, none of this happens. And Jerry goes, who's Jane Doe number 1? And it blew my mind that these guys who are leading churches who, Radiant Network and IHOP KC were pretty darn closely related. They spoke at each other's churches, spoke at each other's conferences, and they just seemed clueless as to what was going on. And Jerry even said, because in there I'm calling, in your letter, I'm calling for a third-party investigation. I'm like, there's a problem here, and somebody else needs to look at it who's outside of this. And Jerry made a joke. He said, well, who would we even call? 1-800 Investigations? And I was able to list a few places, like Grace, Snap, places that do this professionally. And so it just, the whole meeting seemed to me that they met with me to silence me and to keep me from telling the story, to keep me from sharing. John Costin, I left the meeting hopeful because of John Costin. I thought that he was genuinely concerned that there might be a problem. And so yeah, that was that meeting. It lasted 2 hours.
And then when you came home, do you remember?
No.
You were like, I would not have done anything differently or said anything differently. And then I think you took some time to process, and then you just reiterated all the same things you've just said now of this is why Jeff was there, this is why Jerry was there, and maybe there's some hope with John because he seemed to be the only one who was concerned.
Yeah, and so subsequent to that meeting, the only time I've ever talked with Pastor Mike since then was when I ran into him at a restaurant in December, and that was just a hi, hello. That was it. Never talked with him again. He never reached out to me.
Yeah, I've never heard from anybody on staff. The only people who have reached out to me individually were 2 women who were like prayer warriors for me, and they both reached
Spiritual
out to
mothers.
me, grandmother. Yeah. But they're not on staff. They're just so
Yeah.
I never heard from anybody again either, aside from these two ladies. We did talk to some of our friends, which we're gonna get to, but as far as people who were a part of the system, nobody even checked with me to see if I was okay, which I thought was weird.
Yeah, and I mean, we emailed when we left. So after this meeting, I emailed our campus pastor, Michael Popenhagen, son of
Oldest
Mike,
son.
senior pastor Mike Popenhagen.
Yeah.
Never heard back from him. Sent him an email saying, hey, we're leaving the campus. If you want to talk, we'd love to. Never spoke to him again. Sent emails to other people who we were leading various ministries for, or we were part of. They were leading the ministries that we were serving in, to let them know we were leaving. At most, we got back a goodbye email, basically. And so then the next 3 weeks got wild. Rumors began circulating back to us about what was happening. There was a rumor that 2 couples had left the church because our best friends came with us. They left at the same time we did. And that there were 2 couples left the church because of issues with Radiant Richland's finances, which, because we mentioned, those of you who aren't familiar, James Daly, truth be known, has been talking to Radiant Richland about their financial issues over there. Go Google truth be known. You'll find it if you want to interested in that. But I had brought that up in the meeting and in the letter, that Mike had lied to me about what happened with James Daly. And that was never addressed, never repented for. And so that was one of the rumors spread. Well, it's because of that stuff that 2 couples had left.
Which is a deflection, because Radiant Richland is not our church. It's just the head church, or what would you call it?
The mothership is what I call it.
Ew. Yeah, so it was a huge, I was like, of course they're saying that, because they would deny nothing's wrong with our church. They just have an issue with the church that Pastor Mike and Jen came from to plant our church.
Yeah.
I have a feeling you're being loud with your papers over there, so sorry.
I'm shuffling papers trying to find something because I'm not organized, because I don't know why. I'm just not organized. So I have a list of some of the rumors somewhere in this mess, and that's what I'm trying to find if I can. See, I write letters that are too long, like that 7-page letter, or one that we'll talk about later, which is 10 pages. Anyway, there were other accusations. Here we go. The one that we had made it all up, that there were no other sources. We just made up all the stories. We heard that one trickle back.
We heard these from friends that were still attending Radiant Jackson.
Yeah. And then, another one that I had, sorry, my papers. I had come home from an international trip in May 24, and I was struggling with PTSD at the time. And I had shared that with someone, a member of the staff, I thought in confidence, and heard a rumor of that I had PTSD and I was looking for a fight. And so I picked the church. Those are a couple. There were more. All of them at best were lies of omission. None of them were, and we don't know who started them. We don't know if it's the staff. We don't know if it was people who were there. We don't know who started them. But what it shows, I think, is an unhealthy culture, because we were part of this before. This is the story of every person we talk to. People leave, a story is spun as to why they left.
And everyone repeats it.
Yeah, and it gets repeated, and usually multiple stories. And that's why we repented at the beginning. We were part of that. I especially was part of that, being in the business side of things. I was told stories of people that I now know were lies. And I don't think I have one that I can share specifically, which they'll point to and say, oh, well, then they're all made up. They're not. It's because we're trying to protect the people, the victims that we are working with. So there were all those rumors. And then some morning, I don't remember the date. We probably have it written down somewhere. We were getting, suddenly a bunch of people started texting us, asking if we were okay.
August 29th, 28th?
Something like that. And we were like,
Either.
what is happening?
Mm-hmm.
Come to find out, Pastor Michael Popenhagen, our campus pastor, again, son of Mike Popenhagen, had shared a Facebook post from Jeremiah Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
In this Facebook post, they talked about people who brought accusations against the church.
Again, he has so many
I'm
pages.
a rookie here trying to do this, and I didn't do it well. I need to next time have a better setup. Oh my. There it is. Okay, in this Facebook post that Michael shared, it talks about those who bring concerns or accusation against church leaders. And it said that they are, quote, partnering with the accuser of the brethren, have a fault-finding demon, have a prayerless heart, and have an unwillingness to serve.
Can I just say, hearing you say this again, like I couldn't even read the whole thing because it made me so sick. And hearing you say this again makes me sick.
Yeah. And our friend Mark, who's outside of Radiant, he confronted Michael. He sent him an email. And Michael responded to Mark and said in it that it was not about us, and that was not his intent. And he did take the post down. Mm-hmm. But he went on. You can see his response. It'll be on the website. And you can see the post. We'll have that on the website too. But saying that he felt like there was a spiritual attack against the church right now and against the leaders with all of these accusations coming up. And again, he claimed it wasn't directed at us, but it sure felt directed at us, having 2 weeks ago brought accusations against church leaders. Mm-hmm. And also, again, with so many people reaching out to us who knew what was happening.
It must have seemed that way to them too.
It was certainly interpreted as being about us. And again, and I sent an email to Jerry. I texted all this to John. I sent an email to Jerry Tice and Jeremy Brown, emails on the website, where I share this. And I'm like, guys, this is insane. Like a pastor's word, right or wrong, has more authority. He carries spiritual authority. And so for a pastor to be calling those who bring concerns to be partnering with Satan, like you've just communicated to everyone in the church how the church, or at least how Michael views those who bring forward accusations. I mean, that is clearly, it will silence people, because if you have a concern, what are they going to think about?
You're going to be called an accuser of the brethren.
Yeah.
Which we're including this for all the reasons Kyle said, but also I want to add that this is kind of textbook of what we've talked about before, where if we just want to say, if you're like, oh, this sounds really familiar, it's because it's the tactic used. And a lot of times when somebody has a dissenting voice, people in the church will say that it's an attack of Satan. Whether it's true or not, you could really blame anything on Satan, couldn't you?
Oh, and people do.
And they do. So, yeah. So not only personally, but it's also sort of a warning to you as why we're including this in our podcast episode 1.
Yeah, and the other rumor was that, circle back, that we were just, for lack of a term, puppets of another person. Or you can see in the email, again, we reference this, there is a family A, we'll call them, and they're family A, person A in the letters and in the email, that the rumor was they were the ones quarterbacking all this, and we were just their puppet masters. Or not, we were the puppets, they were the whatever.
Yeah.
I'm mixing metaphors, it's not going well. And so I actually got a call, because this person had moved. They had moved away, and that's why they weren't at Radiant anymore. And I got a call from him that said, hey,
what's going on?
Yeah, what's going on? We just got a call that they're saying that we're the ones doing this. We have people who were coming to visit us who are now not coming. What's happening? And we were like, and to clarify, this family was not involved.
No.
They were not one of our sources. They were not involved at all prior to this. And yet, from our view, there was a full-on character assassination of them by
The church.
the church.
Radiant Jackson.
And we have traced some of them at least came out of the mouths of leaders. Whether or not they started them, we don't know. But I mean, people, friends of these people were planning to go visit them like the next weekend. And suddenly they're getting calls from their friends that we're not coming to visit. And we're like, what is happening? Well, it's because somebody from the church, again, I think this is inference. This is not verified. But it seems like somebody from the church went and told them not to go visit these people, or at least spread something about them that changed their opinion of them enough overnight to change their minds about visiting them.
It makes me mad still. I'm still mad for them because they were not involved at that point.
Yeah, and that's what I even say in the email. Like, we stepped out with eyes wide open. We have had so many of these conversations with people, not just at Radiant Jackson, but at other Radiant Network churches outside of Radiant churches. That meeting I had on August 15th, everybody has that. Everybody, at least that brings their concerns forward, has that meeting. What we realized is we were unique, that we knew what was happening. We knew that what that meeting meant was that we were going to lose our community, that we were going to lose our church, that we were going to lose friends. Everybody else had that meeting and didn't know that. They went into these meetings thinking everything was going to be good. Everyone's got a good heart. We're all following Jesus. We're just going to sit down, iron these things out, and we'll be good to go. And instead, people go into these meetings and they get Jerry Tice intimidating them. They get Jeff Allen wanting them to name names. And they get bullied and pushed around and are stunned when it happens. I don't remember where I was going with this.
No, it's a good point, though, because we mentioned already, Remnant Radio podcast. We had listened to all these things. You read all the books. I read some of them. So we kind of knew the playbook that maybe they didn't even know they were doing, but we expected it. And so my heart still goes out to this family A because they didn't know what was coming for them. And Kyle and I were prepared to take the bullets for this. And they just got destroyed for something that they were surprised about. They had no idea what was coming.
Yeah, and I guess that's where I was going, is that we knew the cost.
Yeah.
We
took the risk. We decided the risk was worth it.
Yeah. And
same with this podcast. Like, we're deciding it's worth the risk because these victims don't have a voice.
Yeah, and we stood out between the victims and the leadership to protect them was our goal. And we were willing to take the bullets, as Laura said. What we were not ready for was the collateral damage of Family A, who wasn't involved at all, getting hit. And that stunned us, and that took us back. I think that was why I sent this email to Jerry and Jeremy. I'm like, guys, this is unacceptable. Whoever started it, it's clearly showing a problem within the system. If out with a rumor, the system full on attacks somebody who gave years of service to the church. And it's
not right.
Breaks my heart. They got destroyed and it was wrong, I guess. I don't know.
That's your conclusion.
Yeah. So anyway, that all happened. So this is all within a 3-week time. And then on September 6th, I got an email from Jerry Tice, and attached to the email is a letter. I'm going to read some of it.
From the board.
Sorry, yes, from the board. It is signed by Sincerely the Radiant Church of Jackson Board. Mike Popenhagen, Jerry Tice, Tim Pryor, Jeremy Brown, Jeff Allen, and John Costin all signed this. Thank you for bringing your concerns and suggestions to the attention of the Radiant Church of Jackson Board, etc., etc., etc. To address your concerns directly, we reviewed and evaluated them through conversations with staff, leadership, and church attendees, some of which have come to us based on the information that has been shared. After careful review, we have not found evidence to substantiate your claims. Next paragraph. We understand this is a challenging time for you, and we respect your decision to no longer worship at Radiant Church. We wish you well and encourage you to seek out a church community whose structure and culture align more closely with your personal convictions. We will speak positively in you and your family. We pray for your continued growth and well-being. Given your departure from the church, we believe it is best to discontinue further engagement on these specific matters with you. However, we remain open to having conversations with others who wish to address similar concerns.
So there you go. If you have similar concerns, go talk to them, right?
But yeah, so this is, again, 3 weeks from the meeting, August 15th, to when I get this letter, September 6th. I think that's 3 weeks, hopefully, thereabouts. So they had conversations with staff, leadership, and church attendees, which I found very interesting since specifically in the meeting, I continued to mention again and again, and in the letter, my sources were outside of the church. My sources were people who had left Radiant, and they talked to no one. We have a number of sources, and they talked to zero people.
And they didn't even try
that
to,
we had
it
talked
seems
to.
like.
Yeah, and in fact, they identified somebody.
Yeah.
We found out later. Sorry, the friends we keep alluding to are because they've given us. They say we can say their names. It's Justin and Alyssa Woodruff were the best friends that left with us. Justin had a meeting with John Costin and Jeff Allen. And in that meeting, Jeff, or maybe it was John, one of them definitely mentioned that they had identified person B as a source. You'll see them in the letter. They had identified person B who was a source, one of the, I think the first person we talked to. And they never talked to them.
They never talked to that person.
They had identified one the sources that Jeff desperately wanted to know so they could go talk to them. They identified one and they never reached out. And again, they didn't talk to any of the people we had talked to. And these, again, we're talking people who had the people I told them to go talk to the people who were high in leadership positions who just disappeared. And they talked to no one. And yet they did this investigation. They talked to staff, leadership, and church attendees to quote, I think it was my friend Mark who said, he's like, it sounds like they went to the people that liked them. And when those people said, we like you, they're like, sweet, we're good. Nothing to see here. And it was just stunning to me that within 3 weeks, they were just like, get out of here. And we don't want to talk to you again. No, even a hint, again, making jokes about a third-party investigation, talked to zero people. And let's see, okay, they talked to staff, leadership, and church attendees. So let's think about the staff here. I don't think I mentioned this. At the August 15th meeting, my firm was fired from doing the accounting. Which
is fine.
Yeah, it makes sense. Like
it makes sense.
You're going to fire the person who's bringing accusations especially if they're not an employee. But everyone on the staff knows that just happened. And then you go to the staff and you ask them if they have any concerns. Are they going to feel free to share? Or are they going to be like, if I share my actual concerns, I might get fired? Oh, and also on the staff, here's the staff. Mike Popenhagen, his wife, Jen, their sons, Joey,
all three sons.
Michael, and Curtis, and 2 of their daughter-in-laws. Like, are they going to be comfortable if they have concerns with their dad or father-in-law? Are they going to be comfortable to share them? And they claim, well, John Costin is there as a go-between, and they could share things with John. Maybe true, but John is one of Mike's best friends. Are they going to be comfortable sharing with John? I don't know. Or let's say they could go to the board. Who's on the board? Jeff Allen, mentored by Mike, another staff member. John, who we've already talked about, and then Jeremy Brown and Jerry Tice, who are also some of Mike's best friends.
And the youth pastor is also on staff and his wife.
Yeah, there's others on staff.
Yeah.
But
I didn't know if you were naming everybody.
No.
Okay.
But and so
the question is, would you be comfortable to say something about, like for me, would I be comfortable saying something about my father-in-law if the father-in-law is the leader of the church? And my job and my husband's job was all tied up into this work.
Yeah.
I don't know if I could.
And so this quote unquote investigation, I guess they don't ever say the word investigation. They reviewed and evaluated. I would like to know who they talked to, honestly. because the people we have talked to who were within the church, no one's talked to them.
Oh, yeah,
about this.
one of the ladies that I mentioned reached out to me, one of the, like, grandmother prayer warriors, they never talked to her, and I thought that was strange, because I'm like, "Wouldn't you talk to her?" Like, she's been there from as long as we were, from 10 years, from the beginning. She wasn't one of the people they talked to. I don't know who they talked to.
Yeah, and circling back, I mean, we're talking 1 Timothy 5. It's, again, my papers are all messed up. Kyle's paraphrase, those
Oh, I
elders
got it.
who... Okay, go for it.
Do you want me to read this whole thing?
No, just
Okay.
5:20.
Okay, verse 20. But those elders who are sinning, you are to reprove before everyone, so that others may take warning.
Yeah, and so we brought accusations of sin about members of the staff. But in the letter, it was Mike. We brought accusations of sin against Mike Copenhagen, senior pastor. And as far as we can tell, the elders did nothing. At best, they did a half-hearted investigation and talked to no one outside the church, who I said are the people that have been sinned against. And they said, all's good, and moved forward and said, don't ever talk to us again. What?
Yeah, you can't sweep us under the rug.
Yeah, and
I
so...
think most people at this point, would be like, oh, okay, I guess it's done.
Yeah, or then let's talk, like, we have elders, Mike Copenhagen, Jeremy Brown, Tim Pryor. I have relationships with all of these guys. None of them have talked to me, or came and talked to me. I've talked with Jeremy about other business things since then. But none of those guys came and talked to me. They just took the word from the meeting, and I guess I gave them a letter. But it seems like if you have a previous relationship with someone who's bringing charges of that nature, you should maybe look into it. Or,
but we didn't.
Yeah, that's true.
We didn't do that.
We have another letter where we list on the website where we list charges against board members. Many of these are items of sin. There's deception. There's plagiarizing sermons. There's inappropriate joking and touching, and it's a long list of sins. And many of the sins we didn't find out about till later through further conversations. What are the elders doing? These are sins that have not been repented for, at least not to the people who were sinned against. And yet the elders said, nothing to see here, and don't talk to us again. Like, that is not leadership. That is not what you are biblically called to do. You are called to hold elders accountable for their sins. Elders are supposed to be above reproach. They are supposed to be blameless. That's in 1 Timothy 3 and in Titus, or 3, I don't know.
Yeah, so
go look at the letters.
So if you're an elder or a pastor there, we want to encourage you that you should be looking to your sheep here. Look at your sheep, not look at each other, because that's what we feel like. They're all patting each other on the back. Everyone's on everyone's board. Everybody goes speak at each other's conferences. And I think the sheep are suffering.
Yeah, and let's just look at the accountability structure. So you have all these guys who are buddies with Mike on Mike's board. And guess who Mike's on their board? Terrible way to say it. Mike is on the board of Radiant Ann Arbor, where Jeremy Brown is a pastor and an overseer of there, I believe. That is as of the last I knew, which is last year around July. Mike is, according to the website of Radiant Church Ludington, he is an elder and overseer at Radiant Ludington. And so Mike holds Jeremy and Jeremy accountable, or Jeremy and Jerry accountable, and Jerry and Jeremy hold Mike. Like, everybody is on each other. And Pastor Lee is an overseer of all of these places. Like, it's not, there is no...
And who's an overseer of Radiant Richland? Isn't it Dr. Michael Brown?
Formerly, they dismissed him. But Jimmy Evans who is also in his own hot water with the Daystar.
Yeah, we're not, stuff. Like, we don't really want to get into all that right now, but, like, look those people up.
Yeah.
Suspicious.
Yeah, and so it's a system, in our view. Like, this was one of the concerns we brought up with in the meeting on 8/15 and the letter, that has played out almost exactly like we said it would, where there is no accountability. We are we're jumping ahead to later in our notes, but we are told as leaders of Radiant Jackson that we are to, quote, protect the vision and, quote, trust the leadership. That is pounded in again and again, especially if you take the Equip leadership class that they offer. And so we are told to protect the vision, trust the leadership, protect the vision, trust the leadership. The vision is set by one person, Senior Pastor Mike Popenhagen. He sets the vision of the church. And so if we are to protect the vision, who are we protecting? It seems to me like the organization is set up to protect Mike. And if we are to trust the leadership, which we did as a couple, what are you to do when the leadership asks you to sin? Like if you read the charges, there's one in there. Because I am a CPA and because I worked for the church or was contracted to the church, I have CPA client confidentiality. There are things that were related to my business relationship that I cannot legally share without their permission. I sent them a letter on February 7th asking for release on particular items, and they never responded. I emailed John. I mailed it to them a few days later, and they've never responded. So there are things I can't talk about, specifics, but there is one where Mike asked me to lie and then claimed it as what I know was claimed as a miracle from the pulpit. It was claimed that God did this thing, and I know that it wasn't. And at the time, it wasn't my CPA confidentiality that was barring me. It was, well, Mike asked me not to, and I trust the leadership, and I want to protect the church, and so I won't talk about it. And that one haunts me because it was right there in front of me, and that's one of many examples.
So I was just thinking in terms of our story. So that letter from the board was when in August, end of August,
September 6th.
September 2024. We have been meeting with like I mentioned, we were small group leaders, so we met with all of them and talked to them and told them why we were leaving and our concerns. And we never said, I think we even said this in the meeting, we're not telling you to leave with us. We want you to just know what we've found and what we're concerned about. And that was important to us to give them information about whether like what we were seeing and why we were leaving. And then let's bring our story up to now. What else?
Well, I think even just with the friends, I think I want to address some of that because again, we thought, just like Laura said, that we could share, and we told them, like, we're just giving you the information, you make a decision, you do what's best for your family.
Yeah.
And we thought we could still continue to be friends and not have it change. Which we found out in real time that that's not what happens. That when you have been abused, I guess I'll speak for we were abused, and then when our friends continue to support the abuser, continue to vouch for the abuser, continue to sit under the abuser's authority, it changes the relationship. And we didn't know that at the time.
Yeah.
And so some of our friends I'm sure they blame us as the reason why we are distant or why we have said, sorry, we don't want to.
Yeah. Why it's hard to have the same level of friendship. And we didn't state that going in because we didn't know. We didn't know any better. We thought we could still be close friends. And at this point, I'm comfortable with casual acquaintance level of friendship because I can't trust them with like this. Like, we're doing this podcast. We can't trust them with a lot of things right now.
Yeah, and as we've talked to, again, more and more victims outside of even Radiant Jackson, we heard the same stories that we had where people shared their story and it effectively ends at least a close friendship when people are not believed. Now, we were unique in that we had people who believed us.
Yeah.
our best friends. Praise the Lord.
Thank you, Justin and Alyssa.
And thank you, Mark. And
Mark and Julie.
yes, you guys believed us, which we now know is so rare. So for those, I guess, if there are other victims who are listening to this and you shared your story and people didn't believe you, you're not alone.
Yeah.
That's the experience of almost everyone that we talk to. And to have people believe you was the unique situation that thankfully we were in. And it was still awful.
Yeah.
And so for those of you who were in that, we're so sorry. And I guess for those who we told our story and then we disappeared, we're sorry, but I guess now you know why. For those who we haven't talked.
We're sorry we didn't know ahead of time that things were going to change.
Yeah.
We knew things would change for us and our relationship with the church of like Radiant Jackson Church. We didn't know that our friendship would change because of your decision, but also because of your inaction, which I know is hard and harsh, but your inaction has made it hard for us.
Yeah. And I don't know, we talked about this earlier. We don't want to talk about not even talking about this to not like, we don't want to shame those people or make it be like, you're the problem.
Right.
But we want, when we met with someone who's way down, like been doing this for years, who was abused, and asked him like, how do you do this? Because I'd listened to this guy early on and he said his biggest regret was that he'd wished he had more grace for those who
decided to
stay. And I said, how? Like,
how do you
I met him and talked with him and I was like, dude, how do you do this? Because I feel like I am failing. And his response was, he's like, I don't know if I should say this. He's like, it's true to our experience, I guess, that when you were there, it's like you're under a spell. And someone said, it's not like you're drinking the Kool-Aid, you're swimming in the Kool-Aid and all you can see is the Kool-Aid.
Which is tragic.
Yeah, but what you need is for God to break that spell. And for us, it was those women from IHOP KC sharing their stories that broke that spell for us. And everyone that we talk to, again, seems to have that moment. But his wisdom, he said, pray that God breaks the spell on them, that he takes the scales off their eyes, that he opens their eyes and they see what's really going on. And so it was encouraging to me because I'm like, oh, that's what I've been doing. Yay. Yeah. It feels like I'm failing, but I guess this guy who's been doing this for years, that was his advice. So yeah, maybe I'm doing okay. I don't know. But yeah, it was super hard, and it is hard for those. I guess those of you who have experienced that, who didn't know, we didn't know either.
And we know that the Lord works in everyone's heart, and that people will be revealed the truth at the right time according to what God has decided for them. Not that we can force them to see anything. That's been a lesson I've learned.
Yeah.
And if they never see it, that's not on us.
Yeah, I guess our part of doing this is, or even just coming forward, because we had the option of just walk. And quite frankly, Laura definitely wanted to walk.
I did want to.
I could not. Most importantly, because I really felt called by God to point this out back in August. But in addition, I couldn't. I was worried that if I didn't say something, then every subsequent story that I heard of abuse at Radiant, I would feel responsible. I would feel I had blood on my hands because I had something that I could have done and didn't do it. And so it's not my responsibility what people do with the information. But I do, and I think we definitely feel called. That's why we're doing this, because we know that people are being abused, and we know there's victims. We know there's victims who don't even know they're being abused, and if we don't do something, I couldn't live with that. And that's a personal decision for us. We're not trying to guilt those who,
right.
Like, to come out and to share your story is so unbelievably difficult. to share your deepest, darkest pain and then have your friends tell you, well, we can still be friends, but we can't talk about Radiant. And I'm like, oh, we can still be friends, but we can't talk about my deepest pain. That's great. Sounds like a great friendship.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. And you can tell we're still sitting in this heaviness. It's still, I mean, it's been almost a year since we left, because we left at the end of summer in 2024.
Yeah,
And
9 months.
we're still trying to figure it out, honestly. Like, we're still trying to figure this out. But for me, Kyle's right. I did want to just ghost, like a lot of people. I think that's my default, is just to be like, I just want to run away and just move on.
Well, last
But
night you were literally looking at houses in another locations.
well, why are you telling? I want to move. Not only because I want to run away from this, but I do. Like, there's a part of me that is like, man, if I didn't have to worry about running into so-and-so at that grocery store, man, life would be so much easier. But also, I do want to live in Colorado. Let's be honest. Like, it's also that. But you derailed me. What was I saying?
I'm sorry.
Okay. It's okay. I must have not been. I don't know. I think I was just talking about how we're still trying to figure it out. Oh, I wanted to just let it go and disappear and move to the mountains of Colorado. But I just keep going back and forth about that this is us standing up for the victims here, whether they've asked us to or not, isn't the issue. God has asked us to. God has asked us to speak up for the people who have no voice. And that's really important to me, especially as we're raising two little kids. They're 6 and 4. Like, I want them to see and know about injustice. And I want them to know that they have a voice, especially in, a community that has been abusing people.
Yeah, and it's hard when your 6-year-old asks,
Yeah.
why can't we go to that church anymore? All my friends are there. And try to explain it to her. Or when she's like, hey, what's with those weird microphone things you've got? And we're trying to explain what a podcast is and why we're doing it. But we're hoping that we can raise our kids to actually pay attention and know that these things exist. Like it's in one of the books, might be the Something's Not Right, where he talks about, we tell kids that there are, well, there's no monsters. There's no monsters. No monsters under the bed. Everything's great. And then in life, we find out as you grow older that no, there actually are monsters out there. Just because most people are good doesn't mean all people are good. And just because some people think they have good intentions and are still doing a lot of damage to people. And I guess we're trying to raise our kids to know that reality. And so they're not in their 30s suddenly learning what abuse is and realizing that they outsource their discernment to other people, and realizing that just because somebody has the name pastor doesn't mean they can be trusted.
Doesn't mean, yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's kind of where our story is now. We've been working on and talking about this podcast for probably the past 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah, it happened really quick.
Because we met with a bunch of other victims, and I mean, apparently we're in this space now where we're talking to people. I never thought we would be here. I think I've told multiple friends that pretty much every day I'm like, how did we get here? And I know we got here because we turned off our discernment and we just, I don't know, got swept away in this. But moving forward, we are gonna keep doing this podcast for as many episodes as we are supposed to. That's so vague. Sorry. We don't really have plans, I guess, is what I should be saying. Is we have no, like, we're gonna release a episode every 2 weeks. I mean, we might. But I feel like we said at the beginning, that listening to these other people's stories is what made a huge impact on us and kind of woke us up. So we're hoping that at the very least, it'll do the same. And then also, We have the website where we're putting these resources on. We'll get to the rest a little, about what's next, but that kind of brings us up to date on our story part, our section.
Yeah, and I think we should move into then like some of the red flags that we saw and ignored. Because I guess for us, that was one of the things that was so helpful. I guess that was the thing that the glass shattering moment for me was hearing those red flags from um, the IHOP KC women. And so I think we want to do that as well. I think a big one, just to start, we've mentioned it so many times, is people ghosting. Like that was, again, one of the key ones from IHOP KC. It's one of the key ones we see. If you are in a church where people suddenly just disappear and then nobody talks to them again, or if they do, it's all, or there are stories spun. Well, they left for this reason, or you hear multiple stories. They left for this reason. They left for that reason. They left for this reason. Just go and talk to them. I think that is our biggest regret through all of this, is those people who left, those people who were our friends, people we were close with, that we just let go and never talk to them again. And those of you who are at Radiant, you probably know the people we're talking about. Like, I encourage you, even if you're not at Radiant, if you're any church, if people are just leaving and they're your friends, or even if you're just like acquaintances, go talk to them. If you are a pastor and people are leaving your church, go find out why.
And I do want to add here that you reaching out, they might not view you as trustworthy yet, but still it means a lot to even just have somebody like ask how you're doing. Cause I had some friends just like ask how we're doing, but not mention any Radiant stuff. Like that still like warmed my heart, but at the same time, it was still kind of hurtful. I know they didn't mean that. I guess I'm just saying, like, just because you go ask doesn't mean that they, as an individual person, have to tell you all this stuff. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, but I'd still encourage go and ask. Like, again, all these people we talked to, so many were said you were the first person to apologize. And I mean, that is heartbreaking. We're talking years and years that these people had been gone, and nobody apologized to them for just letting them disappear is insane. And yet, again, we were part of this. We were part of this problem.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's why we're so passionate about bringing it to the forefront, because it's a problem. So I guess red flag, if people just disappear, especially people who are highly involved,
Mm-hmm.
go find out why. Don't just let it happen. Don't just take the leadership's word for it, because guess what? I was part of that spin machine. When people left, I was told what to tell people. And I have documents of that I can't share. I was told, tell people this, tell people X, and I know that X is untrue. And so it is so hard to be like, don't trust your pastors. But at least
It's
verify.
It's one red flag in the list of like many that kind of make up this whole picture here. So yeah, like it's just because one of these things we're about to say is happening doesn't mean your culture is abusive, but it might.
Yeah, it's certainly
Right.
enough to ask questions, I would say.
Yeah, don't outsource your discernment. I think you said that earlier, and I really like that.
Yeah, what else you got?
Culture of secrecy, that's something that I think I don't think that's unusual, but I think it can be taken to the extreme. I think transparency was preached a lot from the pulpit, but a lot of the stuff was kept secret. There were sort of some invite only classes, um, invitation only groups. Certain people were picked to lead specific groups. Um, they had good reasons when these things launched, or so I thought, but it's another red flag that it didn't sit well with me at the time of why only certain people even know that Equip, which is a invitation only leadership class, Some people, like, the church didn't even know it existed, and it's because they didn't want people to ask to be invited to it. They wanted to only invite who they wanted to invite. Maybe that's okay, but that didn't sit well with me, and I ignored that.
And even just in the business side, the amount of times and the amount of things I can't talk about because I was told, don't tell people this or that or these various business things. And again, I sent them that letter asking to be released, and they haven't released me, which I think at minimum should raise some questions about what are they trying to hide that they don't want me talking about.
Yeah, we have a friend who works for Dow Chemical, and so he has, like, so many restrictions, but he works for, like,
Yeah, he has.
he's a chemist, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he has all, and so I just keep thinking, like, business world and the church organization should operate differently.
Yeah, and there's
And
no
it's
sorry.
this one kind of isn't.
Yeah, Radiant, you don't have trade secrets. Dow does. That's not what this is. It's instances and stories.
It's
Yeah.
trying to protect the image. Jesus was not about image. Just look at anytime you talk to the Pharisees. There you go.
Yeah.
Should we keep this moving?
Yeah. Yeah, we could talk about that one for a long time.
I know.
I think another one is just how people were expendable. They wouldn't say that, but those were
Right.
the actions, especially people, let's say we had 3 services running at the main campus, and people would ask, hey, could I go from serving 2 to 1? Or, hey, I need to take a break from serving. And the response,
Multiple people have told us this.
the response was, yes, but when can you start back? Like, oh, I want to go from 2 to 1. Okay, but when can you go back to 2? Hey, I need to take a break. Okay, but how soon can you get back? It was, I don't want to say never. In the stories we have heard, it was rarely oh, how are you doing? How can we help? Is there something? Do you need a rest? What's going on in your life? It was, okay, but how soon can you get back to keeping the system moving?
Yeah, that's definitely a red flag. Yeah, we had there's a women's event that I've served on a few times, and my friend Alyssa and I were both serving on it. And one day, Alyssa wasn't feeling well. This was May of 2024. Alyssa wasn't feeling well, and I knew that my role was not needed for the next thing after lunch, and the screen was already set up. There was no pressing play, there was nothing. So I decided to help her because she wasn't feeling well and thought she was going to pass out. We walked back to her cabin. She laid down. I was getting really concerned. I thought she was going to pass out. Um, I'm pausing because we might need to check with Alyssa to see if she's okay with me saying if it's okay if I say. We started to suspect that she was having a panic attack, but the point of the story is that I was with her instead of in the group gathering, because I was worried she was gonna pass out, and I thought, if she just I can't just call. I wanna be here if I need to call an ambulance. I'm not gonna leave her alone. I'm not leaving her to just pass out by herself in the cabin. So, I chose to stay with her, and in the back of my mind, I knew that the leaders weren't gonna be happy about that, and guess what? They weren't. Um, we went back. We had missed one of the ladies telling her story, and I had leaders, 2 of the main leaders come up to talk to me about it and express their displeasure at us not being in the big gathering, and thank the Lord, I just had the attitude of, like, I was not gonna let her pass out by herself in a cabin, and I was really unapologetic about it 'cause I wasn't gonna choose the show, the event, the program over my best friend being sick. And this is just one small example of how oftentimes the people that are volunteering or are leaders or on staff, if you feel like you are not as important as a participant, if your health mental or physical health, if you find that that's being disregarded for the sake of the larger gathering, I would call that a red flag.
Yeah, I think the church, the big C church, the people of God, Jesus followers, should be about the people. Like, is that not what Jesus was about? Rather than the gathering is important. The gathering of believers.
Yes.
Don't forsake the gathering. Like, it's important. But the gathering is the people, not the organization, not the event, not the...
Again, God works wherever and does work wherever he wants to.
Yeah. Another one, just let's, theological, what's the word? Standardization, I guess, I think I used before, of, you have a specific example, we're in that leadership class, Equip, where Mike said that he had a theological disagreement with Pastor Lee, head of Richland, head of the network, Mike's mentor, but no one would ever know what that was because I don't even know.
Mike was submitting to Lee and would never talk about it.
Yeah, would never disagree with him like not even publicly, just wouldn't disagree with him theologically. And that was a theme, again, we've heard other stories of victims who brought forward theological questions or theological differences and were squashed and hammered and told to get in line. Either you believe what we believe or you're out. And that's insane. Sorry. Probably shouldn't have said that. But we have 2,000 years of church history, and we have scholars beyond scholars who have different opinions on pretty much everything within Scripture. And on things that are not core doctrines, we have to align with the church and not even disagree with our mentor. Like, that's
not healthy.
Yeah, it's not healthy. Whereas, would it not be? We've mentioned Remnant Radio. The reason I got into listening to Remnant Radio is because it's a theology podcast who brings people from different views together to talk about theologic issues. Words are hard. Yet we have a church that says you agree with the senior pastor or you get out. Like, that's not okay.
Or you stay silent.
Yes, that's probably better. You stay silent.
Do you want to talk about some of these grooming phrases that we've written down here?
Yes. One of Mike's words often, he would ask people to do something, and when they said yes, he would say, "Thank you for your yes." I'm sure he had a good intention with it, but I can tell you that it was a burden. That Mike saying, "Thank you for your yes," was communicating to those who didn't want to say yes, or to those who said no, that they were less valued. It'd be my opinion on that.
Yeah, this next one on our list, I've heard a lot. We heard it a lot when we decided to leave as well. Protect the vision is a buzzword, but here's the big one. Trust the leadership is a really big buzzword. There's so much value in that. There definitely is. But again, what are you trusting them to do? Are you trusting them to do your thinking for you? Because if you're trusting them about the reason we left, they're not telling you the truth here. Okay? So yeah, anytime I hear those phrases now, I'm like, I get the ick, because I'm like, yeah, you can trust them, but don't forget that the Holy Spirit reveals stuff to you too. Here's a big one. Gossip. Oh my gosh. I feel like there were so many teachings from the pulpit about gossip, and it's sort of like a hot button issue in probably, I don't know if it's just charismatic churches.
Yeah, including a literal month-long teaching on gossip right after person B left the church.
Which, yeah, we can, yeah. You know that's wrong, audience, right? You know that's wrong. You don't do your sermons directly to one specific person. That's so awkward. But everything is not gossip, by the way. We were taught in this equip class, again, this invite only equip class, that you have the power to either pour water on a fire, which the fire is gossip, so you can pour water on it, or you can pour gasoline on it, which is what you're supposed to do. Okay. Can you tell I'm fired up about this? There's a big problem because we were being taught that anything critical or negative about church leadership was gossip, and we should shut down gossip. I did this. This is why I'm so mad about it, because this is something that I was a part of, and I was really good at it. I was really good about quelching the fire. I took that teaching to heart. And certainly, here's the thing. All these red flags could be good, could be bad, but man, the preponderance of evidence here is that it's bad with all of these things together. So again, if this is you, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I did this to you. I did this to many people. Of like, I heard your concerns, I heard your criticisms, you didn't really like that message, you didn't like whatever, and I just shut it down because I thought being a good person in leadership at the church meant not listening to disagreements, and that's not true.
Yeah, and I think even we have a very recent example of this. I think it was this week. Michael Popenhagen, our campus pastor, shared a quote from Lisa Bevere on Facebook. This is the quote. What gossip is: a counterfeit form of intimacy that bonds people over brokenness rather than truth. And is that a good definition? Maybe, but
Why are you sharing that on your Facebook?
yeah, and intimacy, it bonds people over brokenness rather than truth. And so brokenness can't be truth. Like, I think it was just a perfect example that popped up this week of like, we were, again, like Laura said, we were taught everything negative was gossip.
Right.
And I think it feeds into the next thing I got. In the equip class, there was a teaching called Son of the House. And that was, there's a lot of problems with it. I don't know how to say it otherwise, but it basically showed there were classes of people within the church. Mm-hmm. And so it's like a pyramid, if you can imagine it. At the bottom level, you have servants, and then you have siblings in the next level, and then the top level were sons and daughters. And this is was taught by Mike in the equip class. Mm-hmm. Let's gloss over the fact that having classes of Jesus followers seems
wrong.
Not what Paul is teaching about in Ephesians. And let's also gloss over the fact that servants are the bottom level, which seems like
we're called to be.
Yeah, we're called to be servants, and Jesus was the ultimate servant. We're going to gloss over those two. And we're going to move to things that they did. Now, there's a list of like a servant does this, a sibling does this, a son does this. But there's a couple things we want to focus on. It says, or Mike said, servants exploit weaknesses and servants leave. Those were two of the things. Siblings expose weaknesses and siblings go. And then sons and daughters, they cover weakness and sons are sent. All right, so I want to just talk about the weakness part. Like, again, servants exploit, siblings expose, sons and daughters cover. I don't know how we didn't see this. Like, we did this class 5 years ago or something.
I think I was uncomfortable with it.
Yeah, but like to say that sons and daughters cover weaknesses, you have literally groomed your leaders, since this is a leadership class, invite-only leadership class, you have groomed your leaders that they are to cover weaknesses. And now, again, all of these things have a grain of wisdom in it. Like, yes, if people have weaknesses, we want to help, we want to do things, but...
Okay, wait, can I interrupt you?
Yes.
Where are the Bible verses that say these things?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, continue.
But like, you have literally groomed your leaders that if you are a son or daughter, if you are the top level in this church, you cover for other people. If you are a top level, you cover sin of others.
Mm-hmm.
And and if you're a sibling, then you expose. And so you have set up a system where if I call out sin in somebody else or in the leaders, rather than cover it, if I call it out, I am immediately demoted
Mm-hmm.
to another class. Well, I'm no longer a son or daughter because I pointed out that sin, so now I'm a sibling. And then in addition, you have that the servants leave. And so
Mm-hmm.
you have set up a system when people leave, well, they were just servants anyway. They didn't matter. I guess maybe I'm putting that in other people's mouths. Not consciously, but I thought that. Why do you think we didn't reach out to people? Well, they left, so they were a servant. So they
We
must,
thought they couldn't hang anymore.
yeah, like we're God's people. We're being called. We're doing something special that no one else has
Special.
done. God's called us to reach the city. So if they leave, then they must not have been up for the task or, all the,
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry we thought that about you.
yeah.
People listening.
And so, I mean, it's now looking back, it's straight up grooming
Mm-hmm.
to say, well, if you cover sin, then you are valued in this church.
Yep.
And it's disgusting to me now, looking back.
Yep. The next one here, another phrase we heard a lot was "you have an orphan heart." This is also an equip class teaching. If you're an orphan, you act like you have no father and your father is God. And basically anything, I feel like this was used against people. And the same one, you are speaking out of your wounding. It just means like, how do I explain that? Somebody would use this against you if you were acting or your reaction wasn't what they wanted. So you would be speaking out of your wounding. So like when I was on this women's event, I wasn't happy with some things there. And I remember talking to God about how there must be something in my heart. What is in my heart, God? What is the thing that is not blocking me, but like please reveal to me why I can't get over this issue that's bothering me. It's got to be something wrong with me. And you know what? The Lord told me it wasn't me. And I just think that is a beautiful example of like the Lord is the one who corrects and guides and teaches us. And it's wrong to think that everything that you disagree with is your wound. It's wrong to think that everything that causes you to question or a problem is your fault.
Yeah, I think another good example is it's later on the list, but a red flag of I witnessed inappropriate and coarse joking in the office. I witnessed what I would consider inappropriate touching among men in the office and on events. And I know of people who brought concerns to leadership about that. And they were told, well, we have freedom in Christ. And so if you have a problem, then you have an orphan heart. And to use that, bringing what I consider to be a sin concern to leadership, it's gaslighting. It's straight up gaslighting to tell people, if people come with a concern, if people come with an issue, you flip it and you say, well, no, you have a problem because it's your heart. You have an orphan heart, and that's why you have a problem with this sin. And yeah, it's gaslighting. We probably should just label that one gaslighting.
Yeah.
Other concern, red flags, like all things, we mentioned it before, all things flowed through Mike. And now probably Mike and John. All things flow through whoever's at the top. Everything goes to there. If they say yes, it happens. If they say no, it doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
Not good in an organization. Just, again, by itself, not a problem. Not necessarily. In conjunction with everything, red flag. What else do we have? Oh, yeah, like the last one I had on there was that the sexual joking and the sexual touching amongst staff within the office and on events. Not okay. And for me personally, I was uncomfortable and I did nothing. So I guess I apologize as well for that. That like the amount of things I saw that made me uncomfortable that I ignored is awful. I guess I don't know what else to say. I yeah, apologize and ask your forgiveness for that for everyone because I think that's just part of it is all those things that you find a way to explain away.
Mhm.
I don't know how to say it. Make sure you're not just doing that. You're not just explaining it away. We had a friend. I haven't asked her permission, so I don't share. But she would have questions, and every single time I explain them away, she'd be like, "It seems like there's like a really like an inner circle that you have to get to,
Mhm.
and we can't find our way like anywhere near it." And I was like, "Oh, there's no inner circle." Like the amount of people I told there's no inner circle, it
Yeah.
there was an inner circle, and we didn't think we were a part of it. We were kind of on the edge of it. People thought we were a part of it. Again, I was useful. I was a good
Mhm.
spin machine guy. And so we were kept close enough, but not quite all the way in.
Mhm.
Um, Probably because they were worried we'd do stuff like this. Um, where was I going with this? Oh, but yeah, just people who brought concerns and explain them away, and I explain them away, and I explain them away. I don't know how to explain. Just have your eyes open. Be
Mhm.
If someone tells you a person left the church because of X, Y, and Z, go ask that person why they left the church. And if the answers don't match up, then maybe do some investigating. Like, uh,
Mhm.
it sounds harsh, but don't take everything at face value that your leaders tell you.
Yeah, that's the, like, sad, hard truth that we've learned well, many things, but one of the things we've learned is, like, we trusted and we shouldn't have.
All right. So now we're going to move on to um, we are bringing charges, accusations against the elders of Radiant Church Jackson. We'll have the letter up on the website that's got these charges listed. I don't remember what the name of the letter is. I probably should have looked that up, but it's on page 4, labeled accusations. It's like 5 pages long, so we're only going to hit some of the things. Um, so we're going to start with Mike Popenhagen, senior pastor and elder. Deception. We have honestly half a page of items where Mike was deceptive. The one we talked about in my confidentiality issue, asking me to lie and then claiming it as a miracle. We have him asking somebody we'll call person B to lie about why they were no longer leading community group. We have lots of lies of things that were told about people who left Radiant. You lied about what happened at Place Z that I mentioned earlier in our meeting in December 2023. You lied about James Daly and why he was disgruntled, quote unquote. We see a pattern of lies and deception. And we view that as not above reproach. 1 Timothy 3:2 or blameless, Titus 1:6. Sorry, you can probably hear my papers shuffling in the background. As well as in line with the deception, we have evidence that you have plagiarized sermons, Mike. I guess I'm speaking to Mike directly now. I'd encourage you guys, life.church. You can go to again, this letter is on our website. We have all the details there. But the service from February 2nd, 2025, you can find it. I think it's called War in the Mind or something like that. You can find that sermon on life.church and check the outline that they give you there and check it against the points in Mike's sermon. It is not word for word, but he used somebody else's sermon without citing it. And that's not the only one. Go back scroll through the list of sermons that are on that website, and you're going to recognize a lot of the sermon series. And I'm not saying every sermon Mike has ever done has been plagiarized. But we have hard documentation of one, and there's more. We found one source. Are there other sources? If you're willing to plagiarize one sermon, how do we know about any of the rest? Other things, abusive communication. the things that you said in that meeting with Place Z, their view of it was that you were on the call to bully them. They told me they didn't find out till later that you were a pastor, and they were stunned that you were a pastor.
And they apologized to us because they realized, because we were saying that's our pastor. And they were like, we're so sorry for you that that's your pastor.
Yeah, and also Person A, who, again, in the letter, Person A, they brought stuff to you and were treated harshly on multiple occasions. And then overall, just abuse of your spiritual authority. You used, again, in my CPA confidentiality, the things I asked release from, you used your authority to attempt to manipulate my business decisions. That's abuse of your spiritual authority. You told Person B and others they weren't allowed to take a Sunday off from serving without your permission. These are people who are not on staff, just volunteers. We're not allowed to take time off. And again, the meeting Z, just absolutely abusing your authority to attempt to get them to submit to what you wanted. We'll move to Jeff Allen. Deception as well. He tried to get me to name names in the meeting. And then when they identified a name, they never went and talked to them. He wanted the names so they could go and reach out to these people, and yet when they did, never reached out. You told people lies about why people left Radiant, just like Mike did. And after Mike shared something with Jeff, Jeff went and told his extended family, even though Mike wasn't supposed to share it with Jeff in the first place. And as well, for Jeff, the coarse joking mentioned above, he is a participant in that. Witnessed it on numerous occasions. Again, in the office, on Awaken events. These are events, men's events that the church does, as well as sexual touching, specifically unwanted sexual touching of Person A.
Who is a male.
Yes, who is a male.
But still.
Yes.
Still not okay.
Not okay. And there is other sexual touching, whether unwanted or unwanted, amongst men on these events, and again, in the church office. And yeah, these things for Jeff. Of course, Joseph, sexual touching, Ephesians 5:3-4. But among you there must not be even a hint of sexual immorality or of any kind of impurity or of greed, because these are improper for God's holy people. Nor should there be any obscenity, foolish talk, or coarse joking, which are out of place, but rather thanksgiving. Like, that's one of many, many scriptures about these things. We'll move to John Costin. Person A told John Costin about the sexual touching from Jeff Allen. And John said, quote, "If you were a woman, I would have to fire Jeff." So John, you admitted that what Jeff did was wrong. Somehow it was less wrong that it was a man and not a woman. It's unclear from my conversations if anything has happened since that, but Jeff is still employed. So I don't know. I don't know what to say. Just to charge that you admitted it was wrong, and yet I guess Jeff has never repented to Person A. So there's that. Like, all of these sins we're talking about, these are unrepentant. These are sins that have happened, that we have identified, that Mike has never gone to any of these people as of talking right now on March 8th, 2025. These have all been unrepentant sins. Jerry Tice, you have abused your spiritual authority by attempting to intimidate me in the meeting to keep me silent. Straight up abuse of your authority as a pastor and as a elder. And then to the elders and overseers as a whole, Jerry Tice, Jeremy Brown, Tim Pryor, Lee Cummings, Mike Popenhagen, John Costin, Jeff Allen. We talked about it already, but the investigation that you said in the letter that you reviewed and evaluated. And yet I still have not spoken to someone who was talked to. as far as we can tell, there was no, and you definitely didn't talk to any people outside of the church, at least our sources. And so you signed a letter saying that nothing to see here. And yet since our meeting, we have uncovered many more sins that we didn't even know about when we had that meeting. And in my opinion, if you had done your due diligence, you could have discovered those yourself. And you as an elder are called to hold elders accountable, to hold pastors accountable. And you did not. So we are charging you with neglect of your duty as elders. At worst, you did nothing to determine if my accusations had any merit. You were called to reprove elders who are sinning before everyone, and instead you swept it under the rug and you told us to go away and to not talk to you anymore. So, from those charges, we have conclusions. I guess, do you have anything to add to that, Laura?
Yeah, I just want to say that we acknowledge that Kyle and I are also sinners, so we're not expecting you to be perfect people. But since you are elders, we expect you to admit your sin, and you're, like we've said in these Bible verses, you're called to something higher. And we want to see that from you. Please.
All right, so what do we want?
Yeah, what's the
this?
point?
The biggest thing we want is repentance. Like we said, those charges we've listed, you can read them. There's more, there's details in the letter on the website. But and that was from the original meeting. If you read that letter, my first thing is repentance. We have brought sin to you that has hurt people, and there has been no repentance. Maybe you would say, well, we repented privately to our accountability people. But you are leaders of a church and you are hurting people within your church. You need to repent publicly. You have told lies publicly. And we are asking you to repent, stating the specific sins and the specific people that were hurt, not I just ask forgiveness for everyone who I have ever hurt. No, we want a specific repentance from the pulpit of the people that you have hurt.
Yeah, and I want to add that we know that all of us will stand before the Lord when our time is up. And I know I'm responsible for my part in it, and you are as well.
We are also, as part of that, calling for all of the elders and overseers of Radiant Jackson to step down. We believe, based on the charges that we have presented in the letter, that they are disqualified from ministry based on, we list out all the scriptures about elders and their qualifications in this letter. And based on those qualifications, we believe that all of these men are disqualified based on their actions and based on the charges that we have presented. So we ask all of them to step down from their positions of ministry. In addition, we are calling for a third-party investigation into Radiant, as we did at the original meeting. At the original meeting, I was not calling for these guys to step down. Now we are, based on all the information that we have uncovered since that meeting back in August. But we are still calling for a third-party investigation. Here's the deal. If we are making this up, then a third-party investigation, all it would do is prove us to be frauds. So why would we be calling for it? If we're making all this up, why are we calling for a third-party investigation? And so I asked them, if they just don't want to pay for it, shoot, we'll find a way to raise money to pay for an investigation. But there needs to be a third-party investigation done by someone who is trained in spiritual abuse and trained in trauma. Somebody like Grace, somebody like SNAP. There's a bunch of organizations out there. See, we're calling for a third-party investigation.
Yep.
If
there's nothing to hide?
Yeah, if there's nothing to hide,
then why?
Yeah.
And we also request that it would be public, not just for your own staff and board to look at. Because isn't there another
Yes.
a third part, and then it didn't.
A lot of people, they'll hire lawyers to do their quote third-party investigation, but lawyers have a specific duty to the client, and they would only expose it. So even the one being done right now by Line of Fire, Dr. Michael Brown, there's no guarantee it's going to be released to the public. And so if there is a third-party investigation, it needs to be done by an outside source, not a lawyer. They need to speak to people outside of the church. You do not get to run it. The organization gets to run it, and it needs to be brought public. In addition to that, we are calling for third-party investigations due to these men also being on the board of Radiant and involved with other Radiant churches. We're calling for a third-party investigation in Radiant Ann Arbor, where Jeremy Brown is the senior pastor there. We are calling for a third-party investigation at Radiant Church Ludington, where Jerry Tice is a senior pastor. We are calling on a third-party investigation at Radiant Richland, which is where Lee Cummings is the senior pastor. And we are calling for a third-party investigation into the Radiant network as a whole. Again, the stories we have heard about other network churches and about leaders, and they're all intertwined with each other. We are calling for a third-party investigation across the board.
Yeah.
Anything else on that, Laura?
No, that's good.
All right. So we're going to kind of move into, I guess, a closure thing.
This has been, we've recorded this all in one sitting. We have not yet decided if it's going to be multiple episodes or not.
Yeah, clearly we're super professional and know what we're doing. So anyway, I guess you just want to say for victims.
And maybe you don't call yourself a victim yet. That's okay.
Yeah, we have had people tell us, well, don't call yourself a victim. Victim mentality, all that things. That's okay. Whatever you want to use, we call ourselves victims. If you have been abused by spiritual leaders, whether it's Radiant Jackson, another Radiant Network church, or any church or ministry, we just want you to know you're not alone. We have talked to so many people. Even just bringing it up, like with my fantasy football guys. I play fantasy football with my friends from college, and they were like, hey, why are you being so quiet this year on our text thread? And so I told them what was happening. And half of them reached out to me with their own stories of similar things. That you may feel like you are alone and you are the only person this has happened to. I can almost guarantee it's not true. When people are abused at churches, there is a pattern of abuse. And so I would encourage you to find someone safe to talk to about it. I understand that is difficult. Because you've probably told people before and you probably have not been believed. So, yeah, I don't know. Just
we understand.
Yeah, I get it. And I hate being like, go talk to somebody, because that's what people told us to do. And often it's not helpful. But find somebody safe. And guess what? It's probably not people on your pastoral staff, unfortunately. It's probably not counselors from within your church.
Yeah, don't get a church counselor. Please.
Go find a professional counselor. There's awesome
people
out there.
They can be a Christian. I guess I want to clarify, like, if your church has a counseling ministry, I would not recommend you use one of those counselors. I would find somebody outside of the organization. Yeah.
And if you're looking for someone, like, send us an email or go to our website. We'll give you that information. We can direct you to people, professionals that we have used, that we have liked. And if it's not a professional, find a trusted friend. And that is also hard, because if you share and they don't believe you, again, like we said earlier, that friendship is wrecked. But I just find someone. You are not alone. And that's if you've been abused. If you don't know that, or if you just have that feeling that something's not right. Like, literally, we've referenced this. There's literally a book called Something's Not Right. And it talks about that, where you're just like we had. We're like, man, something is off and we don't know what. Go to somebody and talk to them about it. Somebody outside your church who can bring outside fresh eyes into what you are talking about, because the things at the church feel normal when you are within the church. But if you go outside and talk to people outside of it, again, not talking about church as the organization. Go to people from other churches, people from other denominations, people from other flavors of Christianity, and
Yeah.
ask and
Yep.
tell them and see if it's normal.
Yeah, our kids go to a private school here in Jackson, and the pastor there has been so much more of a pastor to me. I mean, that's what you want. That's the community you want, and I know it's hard to find, but you're not alone, and I also wanna encourage you to not stuff it down, but to seek healing from the Lord, because you can find healing here. I'm not gonna tell you what your path is for that, but we want you to know that you're not alone, because we felt very alone. And even this past week, we talked about it a couple nights ago about how it feels lonely. And we mentioned before, we have multiple friends who are supporting us and in this with us, and it still feels lonely. I just wish, I don't know. I wish we could just be your people,
Yeah, and
'cause it's okay.
just other tips. I guess this is just us speaking from our last,
Experience?
9 months of walking down this road. Um, how do I say it? Don't rush. Like, on one hand, I want you to talk to people. Like, it's healthy and it's been healing for us. On the other hand, like, don't rush it of like trying to force your healing. Trust me, that doesn't go well.
Yeah, like trauma counseling, abuse counseling.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just looking up on my phone, I listened to this podcast. There's something called the Spiritual Abuse Institute. I really like them because they have actual advice and, like, steps to take, where I feel like we so far, like, this is our story, us sharing our story. We are not experts in spiritual abuse, but if you want somebody who has resources, they also have a checklist on there, which I find really cool to, like, here are some, I forget what they call it. Um, I'm gonna find it for you.
So,
It's under resources, spiritual abuse checklist. It has 20 elements of spiritual abuse, and then you can go through. So I think if you aren't sure, or you're like, I have some red flags, that might be a good resource for you.
yeah, and just for me too, writing like these obscenely long letters that I write has been therapeutic for me, just to get things out of my head and onto the paper. But if you are that person who is stuck in your head, I think we've all been there. Of you're just on that treadmill of all the things. Am I the crazy one? Is
Yeah.
this real? No one's believing me. What about this? What about that? What about that? And just going, going, going. Um, you're not alone. Lots of people have been there, and we've all thought we were the crazy ones.
Yeah, and like we mentioned earlier, Kyle and I came out of a church culture that taught that gossip was wrong and, like, not godly. And so it took me a while to get that out of my head of like, "Oh,
It's
no, I'm gossiping."
Yeah, gossip is bad,
It
but
is.
to define that telling your story is not gossip.
Yeah.
So, sorry,
Yes,
wanted to
thank
clarify
you.
before that
No.
gets taken and spun.
No, no. You're right. I guess I just want you to know that it might take unpacking some of the things you've been taught, some of the grooming techniques that you've sat under. It might take you some time to realize the truth in that, and that's all normal, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah, anything else for victims?
No, just, I mean, we feel you.
Yeah, I mean,
It'll be okay.
feel free if you're like, I don't know anyone else to say, if you're the first people that I've heard a story from, reach out to us. We would gladly talk with you. I'll just
Yeah, our email is faithinthefallout@gmail.com.
Yeah, so, or you can find us on the website, which I think is faithinthefallout.com.
Yeah. It hasn't been, it's not live yet.
Sorry.
At the time of this recording,
Professionals.
at the time of this recording, the website is not live. So by the time we actually get this out, it might be that. We'll put it in the podcast notes when we figure out how to do that.
Yes.
Okay, so we have some resources that we're going to end with here.
Oh,
Wait,
I just
Kyle's
want to
got
read
something.
something too for everyone else who you're like, I'm not a victim. I don't know. I guess maybe I'm just saying this to people who are still at Radiant Jackson. Take it for what you will. I'm reading a section from the book Something's Not Right by Wade Mullen. Quote, those of us who come to learn the plight of the victim must consider our own responsibility in that moment. When we hear the cry of the victim and the deceptive pleas of the abuser, are we honest and sincere about who we choose to gather around and why? Our response reveals whose voice we honor more. Consider these words from Judith Herman. It is very tempting to take the side of the perpetrator. All the perpetrator asks is that the bystander do nothing. He appeals to the universal desire to see, hear, and speak no evil. The victim, on the contrary, asks the bystander to share the burden of pain. The victim demands action, engagement, and remembering. People often defend their silence by saying, quote, I don't want to take sides. More often than not, that is simply an excuse for not pursuing truth. Who do we usually hear that from? The leadership attempting to maintain order. And even after the truth has been established, those who chose not to pursue the truth often want to remain neutral. But there is no remaining neutral. Bystanders must take sides either to be active supporters of the wounded or to actively turn their backs. There is only deception and truth. People who choose to remain neutral are giving safe passage to lies. Elie Wiesel powerfully said, I swore to never be silent whenever and wherever human beings endure suffering and humiliation. We must take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. And so I just want to encourage people, either
Sort of like an action step.
Yeah, either we're lying and we're the enemies, or there is a problem at Radiant Jackson, and there is sin amongst the leadership of Radiant Jackson, and it needs to be dealt with. We as followers of Jesus cannot remain neutral on sin.
Mm-hmm.
So either we are sinning egregiously, as in Laura and I, or the leaders of Radiant Jackson are. And to remain neutral or to do nothing, you are throwing your support behind the leaders of Radiant Jackson. And I guess I just want to make that clear from our end of like, to do nothing is to decide to help the oppressor. And what does do something mean for you? I don't know. It's going to be different for each person. We are called to step out here and to publicly talk about this. We talked to a friend yesterday who God is asking them to do the opposite and to stand back and just talk to people individually. And so whatever it looks like, it looks different, but
we encourage you not to remain neutral because there is no neutral.
All right, on that happy note.
Okay, we have some resources. So Kyle just read from Something's Not Right by Wade Mullen. We've also mentioned in this podcast Bully Pulpit by Michael J. Kruger and A Church Called Tove by Scott McKnight and Laura Behringer. We also really like the Roy's Report. Check that out if you haven't. And then we have a bunch of podcasts because we are podcast people. We like podcasts. So hence we're thought this would be a good method of distribution for our story. We recommend that you listen to Remnant Radio, Mike Winger, Wake Up and Win, and also the Roy's Report has their own podcast.
Yeah, and these aren't all dedicated to like talking about, but they have other things like go search out when they're talking about spiritual abuse or when they're interviewing victims or when they're doing.
Yes, and I mentioned Spiritual Abuse Institute, and their podcast is called Church Disrupted. And if you are new to, I don't want to say new to, if you haven't heard of church abuse scandals before, I would encourage you to follow some news from the Christian realm because this is important. Mike Bickle, IHOP KC, Dr. Michael Brown, Mark Driscoll.
This Robert Morris. There's a ton going on right now.
Yeah, it's not. We know it's not a new thing, but we've talked about, just Kyle and I have talked about how there's a lot that we don't like about social media, but the benefit is that the individual person that nobody would ever hear from is now having their voice heard. So please don't stay ignorant to abuse cases in the church.
Yeah, and as we have researched all these cases, the similar patterns emerge across all of them. As I was listening to some podcaster, and they were like, "Do all these guys get together and have coffee and figure out how to abuse people?"
No, they all
because they all do the same thing.
They all go speak at each other's conferences.
Yeah, so
is what happens.
Again, that's our encouragement, just to look into these things, start learning about them. Yeah. It opened our eyes. I guess I'll leave it at that. It opened our eyes to see the same patterns in our church as were happening in these other places that had abuses. So I would encourage you to do some investigation.
Yeah. So please share this podcast. It's gonna be it's gonna be on Spotify. It should be on Apple Podcasts.
I think YouTube. Mark told us we could do that. We have no expertise in any of this.
We're gonna do some things, and we're gonna get it there so you can share it. So share it, please, because like we said many times, stories are important, and they really helped us.
And if you're in a place that you want to share your story, again, please reach out. Whether it's sending it in an email or whether we get your contact into one, we can reach out to you. We want to provide a space for people to share their stories because it brings healing.
Yeah.
Do we want to wrap it with since we're called Faith in the Fallout, we were trying to figure out a good way to wrap.
Mm-hmm.
And we think it's, how do I phrase
it? Because I think what we were after we've done an hour recording,
like 2 hours at least, but
I think one thing we struggled with is that something I really struggled with is how serious and honestly hard it is to talk about all this stuff, but yet we believe there's hope. We're clinging to hope here. So we had discussed a way to kind of end it. Like, it doesn't have to be totally optimistic. So we're still going to try to honor the heaviness and the hard things that we've talked about, but also acknowledge that there is some hope here.
Yeah. So I think just sharing what God has done in the midst of like a good thing that God has done, because we know God works everything for good. This has been a terrible, awful year walking down this road. And yeah, I guess for me, what I tell people often who I'm talking to about this is I have never been closer to God than I am now. And I have never looked more like Christ than I do now. And yet, I'm not doing, I guess I've always thought following Jesus was doing all the things. You go to church, you serve at church, you do all the things. And I'm still doing a lot of the things. But honestly, we've been to church once in the past 8 weeks. We go to church because, I don't say we, I will say me. I go to church because I am worried if I don't go, I will never go back. Because I have been so betrayed and so hurt that I don't trust pastors. I can't sit in sermons because I saw how sermons were used for manipulation. And so when we do go to church, I excuse myself and go to the lobby during the sermon. And yet in the midst of that, God has brought immense healing and immense hope. Like I have no hope for the Western church as a model, as an organization at all. I've just lost that. And yet I see growth in myself, and I see hope, and I see Christ in me more than I have at any point in my life. I don't know where I'm going with this. I'm just rambling. But I guess my hope through it, my faith in the fallout has been I am so much closer to God through this, even though it has looked differently than it has looked at any point during my life.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we'll leave it at that. On to you, Laura. That's my spewing.
No, it made sense. It makes sense. You're good. For me, the good things there are many good things that we've still found in this season, but one thing I'm very thankful for is that community that we are a part of because of our kids' school. It is a private school, and I am just excited to be a part of a new community, and I definitely still have guards up. But like I said, the pastor over that community has been just real. It's like, just thank you. Thank you, Pastor Derek, if you ever listen to this. You are what a pastor should be. And you have loved our family even through this. And you don't really know us that well, but you've loved us. There are other pastors in our community. Like we said, we have visited churches. We have friends at other churches. Thank you for inviting us to your community. We are so grateful you have found a place to be. I'm hopeful that we will, because we know that the church is the bride of Christ. The church is the bride of Christ, and that is important to us. And just because the church we went to, the organization is broken, does not mean we've lost hope in the church, which means the people of God. And the people in our community that are not a part of Radiant Church Jackson have been the church and the body of Christ to us. So thank you for that. I did not expect to get emotional.
Yeah, and I'll add on to it. Thank you to our friends, like we said earlier, who believed us.
Yeah.
We now appreciate how unique that is, and you guys are awesome. And it's not just those we already mentioned. There were others too who we haven't gotten permission to use their names.
Yeah.
So we will not use them here, but thank you guys for listening and for believing and for walking next to us through, quite honestly, one of the worst years of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, you were trying to end it on a happy note, and they just totally downed it with that last time.
Did we succeed?
My bad. Should have just left it. Thank you for helping us and walking us through it. Yay.
Yeah, we love you guys. Thank you for listening to us. Anything else before we... Okay, we've got some...
I mean, we did a lot. It's been a long time already, so.
Yeah. All right, so we got some outro music to play.
So yeah, thanks for listening.
Goodbye.
Bye.